Rain drummed against the ancient windows of Windsor Castle as I made my final rounds that October evening. 23 years of service to the royal household had taught me to move through these corridors like a ghost. The castle held different energies depending on the season, the occasion, and most importantly, the mood of its royal inhabitants. Tonight felt different. Heavy. Charged with an electricity I couldn't quite place. My name is Margaret Thornton, and for over 2 decades I've served as senior private secretary to the monarch. I've witnessed coronations and funerals, state dinners and family crises. I've seen the royal family at their most public and their most private. I thought nothing could surprise me anymore. I was about to learn how wrong I could be. The day had begun like any other autumn Tuesday. King Charles had spent the morning reviewing state papers in his study, occasionally pausing to gaze out at the gardens, where the last of the season's roses clung to their stems. Since ascending the throne following Queen Elizabeth's passing, His Majesty had thrown himself into his royal duties with an intensity that both impressed and concerned those of us who worked closely with him. At 75, he carried the weight of the crown with a determination that seemed to grow stronger each day, as if he were making up for lost time. Prince William had arrived that afternoon for what the official schedule listed as a private family meeting. Such meetings weren't unusual. The Prince of Wales often consulted with his father on matters of state and royal protocol. But something in the way they greeted each other, the careful formality that seemed to mask deeper currents, suggested this was no ordinary consultation. I had been summoned to the king's private study at 7:30. Burgundy walls and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves had always been one of my favorites in the castle. It smelled of leather-bound volumes and the faint trace of His Majesty's preferred cologne. 2 comfortable chairs sat before an ornate fireplace, where a modest fire crackled against the evening chill. "Margaret," King Charles said as I entered, his voice carrying that familiar mixture of warmth and authority. "Please, sit. There are some documents that require your immediate attention." I took my usual seat and opened my leather portfolio, expecting the routine flow of correspondence and official papers that typically filled our evening sessions. But instead of reaching for his desk, His Majesty walked to a small, ornate safe hidden behind a portrait of his grandmother. I had seen him access this safe only a handful of times in all my years of service, usually for matters of the highest sensitivity and importance. From within, he withdrew a burgundy velvet box. The box itself was unremarkable, but the way King Charles handled it, with a reverence bordering on trepidation, immediately captured my attention. His fingers, usually steady and precise, trembled slightly as he placed it on the desk between us. "Margaret," he began, his voice softer now, almost reflective, "in your years of service, you've seen this family weather many storms. You've watched us adapt, evolve, sometimes stumble. You've been discreet, loyal, and above all, you've understood the delicate balance between tradition and necessity." I nodded, uncertain where this conversation was leading but sensing its gravity. Outside, the wind had picked up, sending bare branches scratching against the windows like skeletal fingers seeking entry. "Tonight, you'll witness something that hasn't occurred in over 70 years, he continued. "Something that goes to the very heart of what the monarchy means, not just to Britain, but to the Commonwealth and beyond. I need you to bear witness, Margaret, to remember, and when the time comes, and you'll know when that is, to ensure that the truth of this moment is preserved." No, before I could respond, there was a soft knock at the door. Prince William entered, his tall frame filling the doorway. He had changed from his afternoon attire into a simple dark suit, and I noticed he carried himself with a weight that seemed to have settled on his shoulders since his father's accession. The easy charm that had defined him in his younger years remained, but it now coexisted with a gravity that spoke of understanding the magnitude of his destiny. "Father," William said, inclining his head slightly. "Margaret." He acknowledged me with a warm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "William, please sit," the king gestured to the chair beside me. "I've asked Margaret to join us this evening because what we're about to discuss will require documentation, and her discretion is absolute." Something flickered across his features. Recognition, perhaps, or apprehension. He clearly knew what the box contained, which was more than I could say for myself. King Charles rose and moved to stand before the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back in a gesture I had come to recognize as his thinking pose. The fire cast dancing shadows across his face, highlighting the lines that had deepened since he'd become king. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of history. "William, do you remember the conversation we had after your grandmother's funeral? When we walked the gardens at Balmoral and discussed the nature of duty, of service, of the sacrifices required by the crown? You told me then that you weren't certain you were ready, that the weight of expectation, the loss of privacy, the constant scrutiny, all of it seemed overwhelming. You questioned whether you could be the king that Britain needs, the king your grandmother was as queen. I felt like an intruder in this intimate exchange, yet I understood that my presence was necessary for reasons not yet clear to me. The royal protocols that govern my work had taught me to observe without judgment, to record without interpretation, but nothing in my training had prepared me for the emotional undercurrents flowing between father and son in this candlelit room. I also remember what you told me, William responded, a slight smile touching the corners of his mouth. You said that doubt was a sign of wisdom, not weakness. Well, that anyone who wanted the crown probably wasn't suited for it, while those who feared it might be exactly what the institution needed. Your grandmother said something similar to me once, though she was considerably less diplomatic about it. She told me that the crown chooses us, not the other way around. Yes, and sometimes it chooses us before we feel ready. He returned to his chair and placed his hands on the burgundy box. William, what I'm about to show you, what I'm about to give you, represents a tradition that predates our written history. It's older than Windsor Castle, older than the Church of England, older perhaps than recorded monarchy itself. The room fell silent, except for the crackling of the fire and the rain against the windows. I found myself holding my breath, sensing that we were approaching a moment of profound significance. The sovereign's ring, King Charles said softly, opening the burgundy box. Inside, nestled in white silk, lay a ring unlike anything I had ever seen. It wasn't the flashy ceremonial jewelry one might expect from royal regalia. Instead, it was a simple band of what appeared to be ancient gold, weathered and worn smooth by countless hands. Set into the band was a single stone, not a diamond or emerald, but something darker. It seemed to absorb the firelight rather than reflect it, as if it held secrets within its depths. This ring, the king continued, has been passed from monarch to heir for over 1,000 years. Not at coronations or state ceremonies, but in moments like this, in quiet rooms, away from cameras and crowds, when the weight of the future demands acknowledgement. William stared at the ring, and I watched as something shifted in his expression. The uncertainty I had glimpsed earlier was being replaced by a different emotion. Not eagerness, but acceptance. A recognition of inevitability that seemed to settle over him like a mantle. Your great-grandmother received this ring from her father in 1936, after his abdication created a constitutional crisis that nearly destroyed the monarchy. She was 25 years old, married for 9 years, and suddenly faced with a future she had never imagined. The ring sustained her through the war, through the challenges of rebuilding a nation, through 70 years of service. King Charles lifted the ring from its silk nest, and I noticed his hands were steadier now, as if the act of holding it had calmed his earlier nervousness. She passed it to me the night before her Platinum Jubilee celebration. Not during the public ceremonies, not in front of television cameras, but in her private sitting room at Windsor, much like this one. She told me that the ring carried the weight of every decision, every sacrifice, every moment of doubt and triumph experienced by those who had worn it before. Why now? Why tonight? King Charles set the ring gently on the desk between them. Mind, because the world is changing, William, faster than it has in generations. The monarchy must evolve or risk becoming irrelevant, and that evolution requires leadership that understands both tradition and transformation. You're 41 years old. You have a young family, a modern perspective, and the respect of people across the Commonwealth. More importantly, you have something I took decades to develop, the trust of the British people. In all my years of service, I had rarely heard him speak so openly about his own perceived shortcomings, or the challenges he faced in winning public acceptance. "The ring doesn't make you king," he continued. "That will come in due course, in God's time and according to constitutional law. But accepting the ring means accepting the responsibility that comes with eventual succession. It means understanding that your life, your family's life, your every decision will be weighed against the needs of the nation and the Commonwealth." When he finally spoke, his voice carried a maturity that made him sound older than his years. "And if I'm not ready, listen, if I don't feel worthy of the trust you're describing." King Charles smiled, the first genuine smile I had seen from him all evening. "Then you're exactly the right person for the role. Your grandmother never felt ready. I certainly didn't." "Readiness isn't a prerequisite for the crown, William. Character is. Compassion is. The willingness to serve something greater than yourself, that's what matters." Lightning flickered beyond the windows, briefly illuminating the ancient stones of the castle walls. It felt fitting somehow, as if nature itself was acknowledging the gravity of the moment, unfolding in this small, private room. "There's something else," King Charles said, his tone shifting slightly. "Something the public doesn't know, something that will never appear in any official record or biography. Well, the ring comes with a burden that each monarch must bear privately. When you accept the ring, you also accept the knowledge of certain responsibilities that go beyond what's written in constitutional law. Decisions that must be made in times of crisis. Actions that may be necessary for the preservation of the realm, even if they conflict with personal desire or public opinion." The way King Charles spoke suggested layers of royal responsibility that existed far beyond what I, even with my years of intimate access to the monarchy, had ever suspected. William's expression had grown more serious. "What kind of decisions? The kind that kept your great-grandmother awake at night during the war years. The kind that require absolute discretion and the wisdom to know when the greater good must supersede individual rights or desires. The kind that ensure the monarchy survives, even when everything else is uncertain." The room fell silent again, and I found myself wondering if I should excuse myself from this increasingly intimate conversation. But King Charles had specifically requested my presence, had spoken of bearing witness and preserving truth. Whatever was happening here, my role as observer was apparently crucial. "Father," William said finally, "are you telling me that there are aspects of kingship that go beyond what we see in Parliament, beyond what's taught in constitutional law?" "Very well. Responsibilities that ensure continuity when legal and political structures fail. Your great-grandmother understood this. She made decisions during her reign that were never recorded, never discussed in cabinet meetings, never subjected to parliamentary oversight. The ring connects you to that understanding, to that burden. It's not magical or mystical, it's simply a symbol of commitment to preservation of the realm by any means necessary." William stared at the ring for what felt like an eternity. I watched emotions play across his face: doubt, fear, determination, and finally, a kind of resigned acceptance that seemed to age him before my eyes. "If I accept this," he said slowly, "if I take the ring, there's no going back." "No," his father confirmed, "there isn't. But William, you've already crossed that line simply by being born who you are. The ring doesn't change your destiny, it simply acknowledges it." William reached for the ring with a steady hand, but I noticed he paused just before his fingers made contact with the ancient gold. In that moment of hesitation, I saw the last traces of the young man he had once been. The university student, the search and rescue pilot, the devoted husband and father who had tried to maintain some semblance of a normal life despite his extraordinary circumstances. "Tell me about the weight," William said softly, his hand still hovering above the ring. "Not the physical weight, the other kind. The kind that kept my great-grandmother awake at night." King Charles leaned back in his chair, and for the first time that evening, he looked every one of his 75 years. The firelight caught the silver in his hair, the deep lines around his eyes that spoke of decades carrying burdens most people could never imagine. "This is what the history books tell you, is that Prime Minister Eden made disastrous decisions that led to international humiliation. What they don't tell you is that your great-grandmother knew about the invasion plans 3 weeks before Parliament did. In all my years of access to royal correspondence and state papers, I had never encountered anything suggesting such intimate royal involvement in government decisions. She had to choose, King Charles continued, wild between her role as a figurehead and her responsibilities as the ultimate guardian of British interests. The ring reminded her that sometimes the survival of the realm requires actions that exist outside normal democratic processes. William's eyes never left the ring. What did she do? Dance with Commonwealth leaders, with American allies, with certain members of Parliament who could be trusted. She didn't stop the Suez invasion, that was beyond even her influence. But she helped ensure that Britain emerged from the crisis with relationships intact and alliances preserved. The storm outside seemed to be intensifying. Thunder rolled across the castle grounds, and I could hear rain lashing against the windows with increasing force. It felt as though the very elements were responding to the revelations unfolding in this small, candlelit room. The ring connects you to a network of understanding that most people never know exists, King Charles explained. Relationships with intelligence services, with financial institutions, with leaders whose loyalty transcends political parties or national boundaries. It's not conspiracy, William. It's continuity. And it's ensuring that when democracies stumble, when governments fall, when crises threaten the very fabric of society, there's still someone who can act decisively for the greater good. I watched his expression change again, as if the physical contact had somehow conveyed information that words could not. During the 2008 financial crisis, King Charles said, your grandmother made decisions that prevented complete economic collapse in 3 Commonwealth nations. She authorized transfers from private royal accounts, arranged emergency credit through connections built over decades, and personally guaranteed loans that kept entire banking systems operational. This was information that went far beyond anything I had ever suspected, despite my privileged access to royal finances and correspondence. The implications were staggering. The monarchy is not just a constitutional institution. None of this appears in any official record, the king continued. It can't. The moment such actions become public knowledge, they become impossible to execute. The power exists precisely because it operates in silence, in the spaces between official government and public awareness. William lifted the ring and held it up to the firelight. The dark stones seemed to pulse with an inner depth that drew the eye and held it. How many people know about this? About what the ring represents? This is the reigning monarch, the direct heir, perhaps 2 or 3 trusted advisors in each generation. Margaret here becomes the 4th person outside the immediate royal family to witness a ring transfer in over 2 centuries. I felt the weight of that responsibility settle on my shoulders. Whatever I was witnessing, whatever knowledge I was gaining, it came with an obligation to discretion that went far beyond my normal professional duties. The Prime Minister doesn't know? William asked. Prime Ministers come and go. Political parties rise and fall. Even constitutions can be amended or replaced. But the crown endures, and with it the responsibility to ensure continuity, regardless of political or social upheaval. William stood and walked to the window, still holding the ring. Lightning flickered again, illuminating his profile as he gazed out into the stormy night. To you. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful, measured. You're asking me to accept responsibility for actions that might conflict with democratic principles, with constitutional law, with everything I've been taught about modern monarchy. I'm asking you to accept responsibility for ensuring that democratic principles survive when democracy itself fails, his father replied. Your great-grandmother lived through the abdication crisis, World War II, the dissolution of the British Empire, the Cold War, and countless smaller crises that threatened to tear the nation apart. In each case, she had to balance her public role as constitutional monarch with her private role as guardian of the realm. Father and son stood side by side, their reflections ghostly in the rain-streaked glass. The Brexit referendum nearly destroyed the United Kingdom, the king said quietly. Scotland came within a handful of votes of independence. Northern Ireland was on the brink of renewed violence. Your grandmother made strategic phone calls, arranged private meetings, and used personal relationships built over 70 years to keep the kingdom united. None of it was constitutional. All of it was necessary. William turned the ring over in his palm, studying its surface as if trying to read hidden messages in the ancient gold. And if I refuse, well, If I decide that this level of responsibility is beyond what I'm willing to accept? The question hung in the air between them. For a moment, the only sounds were the storm outside and the crackling of the fire behind us. Abdicate your position in the line of succession, King Charles said simply. Not publicly. That would create precisely the kind of constitutional crisis we're sworn to prevent. But privately, practically, the ring would pass to Harry, and eventually to George when he comes of age. The mention of Prince Harry brought a flash of pain to William's face. The rift between the brothers had been well documented in the press, but I sensed there were deeper layers of family conflict that the public never saw. Harry doesn't know about any of this? Still, the ring can only be held by someone committed to the realm above all else, including personal happiness, family relationships, and individual desires. His new life in America, however justified or understandable, pawned, William returned to his chair, but he didn't set the ring down. Instead, he held it loosely in his palm, as if testing its weight. "Tell me about the stone," he said. "It's not like anything I've ever seen in the crown jewels." King Charles smiled, the first genuine warmth I had seen from him all evening. "And the thing that ring matters more than any crown or scepter. It's called the Heart of Albion, and it's older than recorded British history. Celtic Druids believed it contained the essence of the land itself, the soul of what would eventually become England, Wales, Scotland, and Ireland. When the Romans invaded, they tried to destroy the stone, believing it was the source of Celtic resistance. When the Saxons came, they incorporated it into their royal regalia. The Vikings sought it, the Normans claimed it, and every royal dynasty since has recognized its significance as the symbol of legitimate rule over the British Isles. The stone seemed to shift and change as the light hit it from different angles, as if it contained depths that couldn't quite be perceived. "The stone chooses its keeper," King Charles said. "Your great-grandmother told me that when she first touched it, she felt the weight of every monarch who had held it before her, their triumphs, their failures, their moments of terrible decision and profound sacrifice. She said it was like carrying the memory of the nation itself." Thunder crashed overhead, so loud that all three of us startled. The lights flickered briefly, and for a moment the room was illuminated only by firelight. In that primitive lighting, with the ancient stone casting strange shadows, the scene felt almost medieval, as if we had stepped back in time to an era when magic and monarchy were more closely entertained. "There's something else," King Charles said as the light steadied. "Something I haven't told you yet. Something that makes tonight's ceremony particularly significant." "What do you mean?" "The doctors have found something," the king said quietly. "Nothing immediately life-threatening, nothing that requires urgent action, but something that means my reign may be shorter than we had hoped." I felt my professional composure slip for a moment as the implication sank in. William's face went pale, and he leaned forward in his chair. "Father, what are you saying?" "I'm saying that the transition we're discussing tonight may happen sooner than anticipated. The ring needs to pass to you now, while I'm still strong enough to guide you through the initial responsibilities it entails." King Charles returned to his desk and pulled out a leather portfolio I hadn't noticed before. "Over the next several months, you'll receive information that will prepare you for aspects of kingship that don't appear in any constitutional textbook. Financial networks that span the globe, relationships with intelligence agencies in dozens of countries, and access to resources that have been accumulated over centuries. Still, these are account numbers, contact information, and authorization codes. Some date back to your great-grandmother's reign, others I've established myself. Represent the monarchy's ability to act independently of government oversight when circumstances require it." William set the ring on the desk and reached for the documents. As he read, his expression grew increasingly grave. "The scope of it, the implications, I had no idea such networks even existed." "They exist because they're necessary," King Charles replied. "Democracy is a wonderful system of government, but it's also slow, deliberative. When rapid action is required to preserve national security or economic stability, these networks provide alternatives." I watched William absorb this information, saw him process the reality that accepting the ring meant entering a world of responsibility that operated in the shadows of public awareness. The young man who had once seemed reluctant to accept even the traditional burdens of royal duty was being asked to embrace obligations that went far beyond anything in his previous experience. "The stone," William said suddenly, reaching for the ring again. "When you touch it, do you feel anything? Anything that might explain why this tradition has survived for so long?" "I feel the weight of every decision that will never be recorded in history books, every action taken in darkness to preserve the light, every sacrifice made by ordinary people who trusted their monarch to protect them when no one else could or would." Bed. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for him specifically. The moment the ancient gold settled into place, something shifted in his bearing. The uncertainty that had marked his expressions throughout the evening seemed to fade, replaced by a gravity that aged him visibly. "It's warm," he said, surprised. "Banned by contact with its rightful keeper," King Charles explained. "Your great-grandmother said it was like carrying a piece of the nation itself, a constant reminder of the millions of people whose lives and futures depend on the decisions made in rooms like this." William stood and walked back to the window, flexing his hand, as if adjusting to the ring's presence. "I can feel it. Not physically, but something else. Like voices. Very faint, but there. The voices of those who held the ring before you. They're not literal voices, of course, but the accumulated wisdom and experience of centuries of monarchy. In times of crisis, that guidance can be invaluable." They stood together in comfortable silence. For several minutes, father and son united in understanding that transcended their personal relationship. Outside, the storm was beginning to subside, the thunder moving off into the distance, and the rain settling into a steady rhythm against the glass. "What happens now?" William asked. "Now you begin to learn what it really means to be king." Over the following weeks, I watched Prince William transform before my eyes. The change wasn't dramatic or sudden. It was subtle, like watching a photograph develop slowly in a darkroom. The ring, which he now wore constantly beneath his other jewelry, seemed to bring with it an awareness that manifested in small ways. A more thoughtful pause before speaking, a deeper attention to briefings on international affairs. It was during one of these sessions, 3 weeks after that stormy evening at Windsor, that I first glimpsed the true scope of what William had inherited, along with the ancient ring. We were in his private office at Kensington Palace, reviewing correspondence from Commonwealth leaders, when his private secretary announced an unexpected visitor. "Sir, there's a gentleman here who says he has an appointment." I paid this card. William examined the card. William examined the card. William examined the card. Plain white, no letterhead, with only a name and a phone number written in elegant script. But his reaction was immediate and unmistakable. He straightened in his chair, and I saw something flicker across his features that I had learned to recognize as the weight of new knowledge settling into place. "Please show him in," William said. "Margaret, you'll need to stay for this conversation." Average height, graying hair, modest clothing that could have belonged to any middle-aged businessman in London. But there was something about his bearing, the way he moved with quiet confidence and observed the room with eyes that missed nothing. "Your Royal Highness," the man said, offering a slight bow. "My name is David Ashford. I believe your father mentioned that we would be meeting." "Well, Ashford. Yes, he said you would be in touch, though he was rather vague about the specifics." Ashford smiled, an expression that conveyed warmth but revealed nothing. "And with witnesses who understand the importance of discretion." He glanced meaningfully at me, and I realized that my presence at this meeting was not coincidental. Whatever relationship existed between this man and the royal family, it was significant enough to require documentation by someone in my position. Ashford represents certain interests that have served the crown for several generations, William explained, clearly drawing from conversations he'd had with his father since accepting the ring. "Interests that don't appear on any organizational chart or government directory." Ashford reached into his briefcase and withdrew a tablet computer. "Sir, if you would examine these files, you'll see the scope of activities currently being monitored on your behalf." William accepted the tablet and began scrolling through what appeared to be intelligence reports, financial summaries, and diplomatic correspondence. His expression grew increasingly serious as he read. "British citizens," he said after several minutes. Selected British citizens whose activities could impact national security, Ashford corrected gently. Members of Parliament with concerning financial connections, business leaders whose decisions affect strategic industries, journalists whose reporting patterns suggest access to classified information. What they were describing sounded dangerously close to the kind of domestic surveillance that democratic societies were supposed to prohibit. How long has this been going on? William asked. In various forms since the Second World War. Your great-grandmother authorized the initial protocols in 1943, when it became clear that traditional intelligence services had significant limitations in protecting royal interests and national continuity. For example, we're currently tracking the activities of 3 separate organizations that pose potential threats to the stability of the Commonwealth. 2 are domestic groups with Republican sympathies and concerning financial backing. The third is an international consortium with interests in destabilizing certain African nations where Britain maintains strategic relationships. The ring on his finger caught the afternoon light streaming through his office windows, and for a moment I was reminded of that stormy night when he had first put it on. What kind of tracking are we talking about? Financial monitoring, communication intercepts, travel surveillance, and when necessary, more direct intervention? Ashford's tone remained conversational, as if he were discussing the weather rather than activities that skirted the edges of legality. Direct intervention? Economic pressure, sir? Information campaigns, strategic leaks to discredit dangerous narratives, occasionally the arrangement of career opportunities that redirect problematic individuals away from sensitive positions. William was quiet for a long moment, clearly processing the implications of what he was hearing. And this operates completely outside government oversight? Not outside, sir, parallel to it. We coordinate with official intelligence services when appropriate, but we're not bound by the same political constraints or parliamentary oversight. This allows for more flexible responses to emerging threats. Back Africa. This one showing what appeared to be financial transfers between various accounts. Last month, we prevented a hostile takeover of a British aerospace company by routing emergency financing through channels your great-grandmother established during the Cold War. The takeover would have given a foreign power access to technology critical to national defense. The scope of it was breathtaking. What Ashford was describing was essentially a shadow intelligence service, operating with royal authorization and funding, capable of actions that elected governments might be unable or unwilling to take. How many people work for this organization? I found myself asking. Ashford smiled at me, the first time he had acknowledged my presence directly. That's classified, madam, but I can tell you that we have resources in most major cities around the world, relationships with key figures in finance, media, and government, and the ability to respond to threats before they become crises. William picked up the tablet again and continued scrolling through the files. These financial accounts, where does the money come from? Private royal investments dating back centuries, returns on strategic partnerships your ancestors established with commercial enterprises, and occasionally, resources recovered from criminal organizations whose activities threatened British interests. Recovered? Asset forfeiture, madam. When we identify criminal enterprises that pose threats to national security or royal safety, we sometimes arrange for their resources to be redirected toward more constructive purposes. Dell. William looked up from the tablet. You're describing vigilante justice. Sometimes the law is insufficient to address threats that operate in legal gray areas or exploit weaknesses in democratic processes. In such cases, alternative approaches become necessary. Ashford stood and moved to the window overlooking Kensington Gardens. Well, sir, your great-grandmother faced similar concerns. When she first learned about these operations, she questioned the ethics, the legality, the implications for constitutional monarchy. But over time, she came to understand that preserving democratic institutions sometimes requires actions that exist outside normal democratic processes. What specific threats are you monitoring right now? Several, sir. There's a journalist who's gotten uncomfortably close to discovering certain financial relationships between the royal family and defense contractors. We're managing that situation through strategic career opportunities that will redirect his interests elsewhere. The casual way Ashford discussed manipulating media coverage struck at the heart of press freedom, one of the fundamental principles of democratic society. There's also a member of parliament whose financial difficulties have made him vulnerable to foreign influence. We're arranging solutions to his debt problems in exchange for information about his contacts. And if I wanted to stop these operations, if I decided that this level of intervention was incompatible with modern monarchy, but it would also leave the crown vulnerable to threats that official intelligence services are either unable or unauthorized to address. The network exists because it's proven necessary over many decades of changing political circumstances. Ashford returned to his chair and pulled out a different folder. Perhaps it would help to review some specific examples of successful interventions from your great-grandmother's reign. The folder contained photographs, documents, though, as William examined them, I could see his expression changing from skepticism to reluctant understanding. This file documents a situation from 1973, Ashford explained. A terrorist organization had obtained detailed plans of royal residences and was planning coordinated attacks during a state visit by the American president. Official intelligence services were aware of the threat but lacked sufficient evidence for legal action. Peak. William studied the photographs in the file. Surveillance shots of suspicious individuals, building plans, and what appeared to be weapons caches. Our people were able to infiltrate the organization, gather additional intelligence, and arrange for the arrest of key figures on unrelated charges while simultaneously ensuring that their operational resources were neutralized. Safe houses were rendered uninhabitable through carefully timed building code violations. Weapons were replaced with non-functional replicas during black market transactions. Key personnel found themselves facing personal crises that required their immediate attention elsewhere. Rather than direct confrontation, Ashford's organization seemed to specialize in subtle manipulations that achieved their objectives while maintaining plausible deniability. The attack plans were never implemented. The state visit proceeded without incident. No one was killed or seriously injured, and no one ever knew how close they had come to witnessing a catastrophic breach of royal security. How many situations like this occur in a typical year? Most are much smaller in scope. Monitoring social media for credible threats, tracking financial transactions that might indicate hostile activities, maintaining awareness of political developments that could impact royal interests. But perhaps half a dozen times each year, we encounter situations that require more active intervention. His private secretary informed him that the king was requesting an immediate meeting on urgent state business. "I'm afraid we'll need to continue this conversation another time," William told Ashford. Ashford stood and gathered his materials. "Of course, sir. But before I leave, there's one thing you should know. The decision to accept or reject these operations isn't one you can postpone indefinitely. Meeting them. There are currently 3 active situations requiring guidance from someone with the authority of the ring." William looked down at his hand, where the ancient ring caught the light beneath his other jewelry. "What kind of situations?" "A foreign intelligence service has approached a senior government official with an offer that could compromise British negotiating positions in upcoming trade talks. A domestic extremist group is planning demonstrations that could turn violent during the upcoming state opening of Parliament. And there's been unusual activity in financial markets that suggests someone with inside information is positioning themselves to profit from a potential crisis in the banking sector. The foreign intelligence approach might be addressed through diplomatic channels, but only if there was enough evidence to prove hostile intent. The extremist demonstrations could be monitored by regular police services, and the financial market irregularities could represent legitimate investment strategies or genuine insider trading that was impossible to prove through normal regulatory channels. "How quickly do these situations need to be addressed?" William asked. "The financial market issue requires attention within the next 72 hours, sir. The others can wait perhaps a week, but not much longer." William nodded slowly. "I'll review the materials you've provided and give you my decision by tomorrow evening." After Ashford left, William and I sat in silence for several minutes. The weight of what we had just heard seemed to fill the room, making even normal conversation feel inadequate. "Margaret," William finally said, "in your years of service to this family, did you ever suspect that anything like this existed?" "There were always gaps, sir. Situations that seemed to resolve themselves too conveniently. Financial resources that appeared when needed. Intelligence that arrived through unofficial channels. I assumed there were relationships and resources that I wasn't privy to, but nothing approaching what Mr. Ashford described. 9. William stood and walked to his bookshelf, where volumes of constitutional law and royal history lined the shelves. "The ring is warm again," he said, flexing his fingers. "Every time I face a decision related to these responsibilities, I can feel it responding. Your father mentioned that your great-grandmother experienced something similar. If there's something about wearing this ring that actually changes how you think, how you process information..." "Margaret, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. They make anti-implicit in activities that undermine the democratic principles the monarchy is supposed to support." It was a question that went to the heart of everything we had witnessed over the past few weeks. The information Ashford had provided painted a picture of royal power that operated in ways that were, at best, ethically ambiguous, and at worst, fundamentally anti-democratic. "I think, sir, that you're being asked to balance competing responsibilities. The responsibility to support democratic institutions and the responsibility to protect them when democracy itself proves insufficient to address serious threats. That's what my father said, but I keep wondering whether there's a point where protecting democracy requires abandoning democratic principles entirely." As we prepared to leave for the meeting, William paused at his desk and looked down at the tablet Ashford had left behind. "Whatever I decide about these operations," he said quietly, "there's no going back to the simpler version of royal duty I thought I understood. The ring has made that impossible." As we left Kensington Palace for Windsor, I found myself wondering whether William was struggling with the burden of new knowledge or beginning to embrace capabilities he was only starting to understand. The distinction seemed increasingly important as the weight of his decisions grew heavier with each passing day. The meeting with King Charles that afternoon revealed layers of royal responsibility that made even Ashford's revelations seem modest by comparison. We were shown into a room at Windsor Castle that I had never seen before. Accessible only through a hidden door behind the king's private study, it contained equipment and resources that belonged more in a government intelligence facility than a royal residence. "William," the king said as we entered, "it's time you understood the full scope of what the ring represents." The room was lined with secure communication equipment, multiple computer terminals, financial markets, news feeds, diplomatic communications, and intelligence briefings scrolled continuously across the screens. "This is the Royal Operations Center," King Charles explained. "Your great-grandmother established it during the Suez Crisis, when it became clear that the monarchy needed independent access to information and communication capabilities that didn't depend on government networks. It's out on government. How is this possible? How can something like this exist without government knowledge? What they don't know is the extent of its capabilities or how it's used. Officially, it's described as a secure communication facility for royal family coordination during emergencies. Unofficially, it's the nerve center for operations that ensure the continuity of the realm, regardless of political or social upheaval." Charles introduced her as Dame Elizabeth Hartwell, Director of Royal Strategic Services. "Your Royal Highness," she said to William, offering a slight curtsy. "I've been looking forward to this meeting since your father informed me of the ring transfer." Dame Elizabeth led us to a conference table surrounded by additional screens. "Sir, what you're about to see represents 70 years of careful planning and resource development, all designed to ensure that the monarchy can function effectively regardless of external circumstances." She activated one of the displays, showing what appeared to be a global network diagram with nodes in major cities around the world. "These are our operational centers: London, Edinburgh, Sydney, Toronto, Mumbai, Lagos, and Kingston. Each facility is staffed with personnel who have sworn personal oaths to the Crown and operate independently of local government oversight." The scope was breathtaking. What Dame Elizabeth was describing was essentially a parallel government structure that spanned the Commonwealth and beyond. The personnel, William asked, who are they? How are they recruited? Many are retired intelligence officers, military personnel, diplomatic staff, and financial professionals who have demonstrated exceptional loyalty to the Crown over extended careers. Others are individuals whose personal circumstances or family histories create natural alignment with royal interests. Dame Elizabeth opened another file, this one containing personnel records and organizational charts. For example, Our Toronto facility is managed by a former Canadian intelligence officer whose grandfather served in the Royal Canadian Navy during World War II. Our Mumbai operation is headed by a businessman whose family has maintained financial relationships with the Crown for 3 generations. Well, there are situations where democratic processes are too slow, too public, or too constrained by political considerations to address genuine threats to the realm. Dame Elizabeth pulled up a different display, this one showing recent operational activities. Last month we prevented a banking crisis in 3 Commonwealth nations by coordinating emergency liquidity support through private channels. Be over God. The official government response would have taken weeks to organize and would have required parliamentary approval that might not have been forthcoming. How much money are we talking about? William asked. Approximately £12 billion, sir, distributed through trust funds, private investment vehicles, and commercial partnerships that have been developed over several decades. Bonsesk, the amounts being discussed were staggering, representing resources that rivaled the budgets of small nations. Where does money like that come from? Centuries of careful investment, strategic partnerships, and what you might call creative financial management. Your ancestors were very good at ensuring that royal resources grew regardless of political or economic circumstances. Dame Elizabeth opened another file containing historical financial records. During the American Revolutionary War, for example, the Crown maintained secret investments in both British and American commercial enterprises. Regardless of which side won, royal financial interests were protected. What she was describing was a level of financial foresight that treated political conflicts as business opportunities rather than matters of principle. The same pattern continued through the Napoleonic Wars, both World Wars, the Cold War, and every major economic crisis since. Political systems is essentially crisis-proof, because it's diversified across political systems, economic models, and geographic regions, though that the royal family is one of the wealthiest entities on earth. The royal family as a constitutional institution has modest resources, King Charles corrected. The Crown as a strategic entity has considerably more extensive capabilities. What they were describing was a separation between the public face of monarchy and its private operational capabilities that allowed for actions that would be impossible if they were subject to normal constitutional oversight. How does this relate to the situations Mr. Ashford described earlier? William asked. Dame Elizabeth smiled. Mr. Ashford's organization handles tactical operations, specific threats that require immediate attention. Our network handles strategic concerns, long-term challenges to the stability and continuity of the realm. For example, we're currently monitoring the rise of authoritarian movements in 17 countries, tracking the development of technologies that could threaten traditional power structures, and positioning resources to respond to climate-related crises that could destabilize entire regions. The scale of what Dame Elizabeth was describing went far beyond anything I had imagined. This wasn't just about protecting the British monarchy, it was about managing global stability from a uniquely royal perspective. The ring, King Charles said, connects you to information and decision-making processes that no elected leader has access to. Because we don't face electoral cycles, we can plan for decades or centuries rather than years. Because we're not bound by party politics, we can make decisions based on long-term strategic interests rather than short-term political advantage. This is enormous responsibility. Second, billions of people, billions of billions of corrected gently. Sir, the Commonwealth includes approximately 2.5 billion people. Our strategic partnerships and financial relationships extend that influence considerably. Decisions made in this room can impact global food prices, international currency stability, and regional security arrangements. The weight of that responsibility seemed to settle on William's shoulders like a physical burden. I watched him process the implications of what he was learning, saw him grapple with the magnitude of power that came with the ancient ring he wore. What happens if I make the wrong decision? If I authorize actions that cause more harm than good? King Charles placed a hand on his son's shoulder. That's the question that has kept every monarch awake at night for generations. The ring doesn't make you infallible, William. It just makes you responsible for consequences that extend far beyond what most people can imagine. Dom, one final display, this one showing what appeared to be crisis scenarios and response plans. Sir, we maintain contingency plans for dozens of potential global crises. Economic collapse, pandemic responses, climate disasters, political upheavals, and technological disruptions. Each plan includes resources, personnel, and strategic relationships that can be activated quickly if circumstances require. William examined the scenario planning with professional interest. His military background had clearly prepared him to think strategically about crisis management, but the scope of these plans went far beyond anything in conventional military or government planning. This scenario, he said, pointing to one of the crisis plans, it involves coordinating responses across multiple continents. How is that possible without government oversight? Because our authority derives from the Crown rather than from elected governments, King Charles explained. Commonwealth nations, in particular, maintain constitutional relationships with the monarchy that exist independently of their relationships with the British government. In times of crisis, those relationships can be activated in ways that bypass normal diplomatic channels. What the king was describing was a form of governance that operated parallel to democratic institutions, drawing legitimacy from traditional sources of authority that predated modern constitutional systems. The Irish crisis of 1998, Dame Elizabeth said, pulling up historical files. Your grandmother's personal intervention was crucial to the peace process, but it happened through channels that don't appear in any official diplomatic record. The relationships built over decades to bring opposing sides together in ways that formal negotiations couldn't achieve. William studied the files, which included private correspondence, meeting notes, and financial arrangements that had supported the peace process. She was essentially conducting independent diplomacy. She was fulfilling the Crown's traditional role as a unifying force, above party politics and sectarian divisions, King Charles corrected. Sometimes that requires actions that exist outside normal constitutional frameworks. The secure communication system began chiming, indicating incoming priority messages. Dame Elizabeth checked the displays and her expression grew serious. Sir, she said to William, we have a developing situation that requires immediate attention. There's been unusual activity in the financial markets that suggests coordinated attacks on Commonwealth currencies, possibly destabilize the Australian and Canadian dollars simultaneously. William looked at the incoming data streams, watching as financial information updated in real time. What kind of response are you recommending? We have positioned resources to counteract the currency speculation, but deploying them would require authorization from someone with the authority of the ring. The amounts involved are substantial, and the response window is very narrow. King Charles stepped back, making it clear that this decision belonged to William alone. The ring gives you the authority to act, but you must choose whether to use that authority. His expression growing more thoughtful as he absorbed the implications. If we don't respond, what are the likely consequences? Significant economic disruption in Australia and Canada, probable contagion effects in other Commonwealth markets, and potential political instability as elected governments struggle to respond to a crisis they don't fully understand. And, if we do respond, immediate stabilization of the targeted currencies, probable profits from the counter-speculation activities, and demonstration that the Crown maintains the capability to protect Commonwealth economic interests independently of government action. Perfectly the kind of responsibility the ring represented. Democratic governments might eventually respond to the currency attacks, but by then the economic damage could be severe and long-lasting. Royal intervention could prevent that damage, but it would also demonstrate a level of independent royal power that most people assume no longer existed. How much money would we be deploying? William asked. Approximately £8 billion, sir, coordinated across multiple markets and currency exchanges. William looked down at the ring on his finger, which seemed to catch the light from the computer displays. And this has been done before? Multiple times, sir. Currency speculation, hostile takeovers, resource manipulation. The Crown has been protecting Commonwealth economic interests through private market interventions for decades. William nodded slowly, authorized the response. Dame Elizabeth immediately began coordinating with her staff, sending instructions to operational centers around the world. Within minutes, the displays showed massive financial transactions beginning to flow through global markets as royal resources were deployed to counter the speculative attacks. The first phase is complete, Dame Elizabeth reported after 20 minutes. Australian and Canadian currencies are stabilizing. We're seeing retreat from the speculative positions as the attackers realize they're facing coordinated opposition. William watched the market responses with fascination. Who was behind the original attacks? We're still analyzing the data, but preliminary indications suggest a consortium of private investors with political motivations rather than purely financial ones, appear to have been testing Commonwealth financial defenses rather than simply seeking profit. The revelation added another layer of complexity to the situation. What William had authorized wasn't just economic intervention, it was essentially economic warfare, designed to protect Commonwealth interests against hostile actions by unidentified adversaries. The authority to act decisively when democratic institutions are insufficient to address genuine threats to the realm. As we prepared to leave the operations center, Dame Elizabeth, how often does the Crown need to take action like this? Day's intervention was larger than most, but the pattern of protecting Commonwealth interests through private action is constant and ongoing. The contrast between the high-tech operations center and the traditional royal chambers seemed to symbolize the dual nature of modern monarchy, publicly constitutional and ceremonial, privately strategic and globally influential. How do you reconcile it? William asked his father as we settled back into the familiar chairs where this journey had begun weeks earlier. How do you balance the public role of constitutional monarch with the private reality of global power broker? You learn to see them as different aspects of the same responsibility. The public role maintains the legitimacy and popular support that makes the private role possible. The private role ensures that the public role continues to serve a genuine purpose in protecting the interests of the people. William flexed his fingers, adjusting to the ring that now seemed heavier than when he had first put it on. I'm beginning to understand why you said the ring chooses its keeper. The responsibility it represents isn't something anyone would seek voluntarily. But it's something that, having been chosen, you cannot abandon, without betraying millions of people who depend on the Crown's protection, even when they don't realize it exists. Yes. As evening fell over Windsor Castle, I realized that I had witnessed something unprecedented in modern royal history. Not just the transfer of ancient authority from father to son, but the emergence of a new understanding of what that authority meant. The ring that William now wore connected him to capabilities and responsibilities that would have been unimaginable to previous generations of monarchs. The young man who had once seemed reluctant to accept even traditional royal duties had evolved into someone capable of authorizing financial interventions worth billions of pounds without visible hesitation. The transformation was remarkable, but what struck me most was that it seemed natural rather than forced, as if the ring had awakened capabilities that had always been present, waiting for the right circumstances to emerge. 6 months after that transformative evening, when William first accepted the sovereign's ring, I found myself once again in a position to witness history, but this time, the circumstances were far more somber and the implications more profound than anything I could have anticipated. The call came at 3:30 in the morning. King Charles had been rushed to hospital with what initial reports described as complications from his ongoing medical treatment. By dawn, it was clear that the situation was more serious than anyone outside the immediate royal circle had been told. The king was stable, but facing a medical crisis that would require months of intensive treatment and possible surgery. Prince William already in conference, with Dame Elizabeth Hartwell and several other individuals I had learned to recognize as key figures in the royal strategic network. The scene in the palace's secure conference room was one of controlled urgency, with communication links active to operational centers around the world. Margaret, William said as I entered, thank you for coming so quickly. While we're facing a situation that requires immediate activation of continuity protocols. Whatever was happening with the king's health, it was serious enough to trigger the kind of crisis planning I had witnessed in the Royal Operations Center. The doctors are optimistic about His Majesty's long-term prognosis, Dame Elizabeth explained. But his recovery will require extended absence from official duties. This creates both constitutional and operational challenges that need immediate attention. William had changed dramatically over the past 6 months. The hesitant young man who had questioned the ethics of royal intervention had evolved into someone who moved with quiet authority and spoke with the confidence of someone accustomed to making decisions. We're implementing transition protocols that were established during your great-grandmother's final years, Dame Elizabeth continued. The ring's authority transfers fully to you for operational purposes, while constitutional succession remains unchanged pending His Majesty's recovery. Publicly, King Charles remained the sovereign, with William serving as regent handling official duties during the king's medical treatment. Privately, the ancient authority symbolized by the sovereign's ring had passed completely to William, giving him full access to the royal strategic network and its global capabilities. "What's our immediate situation?" William asked. Dame Elizabeth activated the main display screen, showing intelligence feeds from around the world. 3 developing crises that require urgent attention. The financial markets are reacting nervously to news of His Majesty's hospitalization, threatening Commonwealth currency stability. There's a diplomatic crisis developing between 2 African Commonwealth nations that could lead to military conflict. And we've received intelligence about a coordinated cyber attack planned against critical infrastructure in Britain and Canada. Each crisis represented the kind of challenge that democratic governments might struggle to address quickly enough to prevent serious damage. Traditional diplomatic channels were too slow for the African situation. Official cybersecurity responses were constrained by legal and bureaucratic procedures, and financial market interventions required resources and authority that elected governments didn't possess. Immediate financial intervention to stabilize markets and prevent currency speculation, Dame Elizabeth replied. Deployment of diplomatic resources to mediate the African crisis before it escalates to violence. An activation of cyber defense capabilities to neutralize the infrastructure attack before it begins. I watched William process these recommendations, saw him weigh the implications of each proposed action. The ring on his finger seemed to catch the light from the computer displays, and I noticed that he unconsciously flexed his hand as he considered his options. A gesture that had become habitual whenever he faced decisions related to royal strategic operations. Authorize all 3 responses, William said without hesitation. Priority to preventing loss of life, then economic stability, then infrastructure protection. Dame Elizabeth and her staff immediately began coordinating with operational centers around the world. Incident. Within minutes, financial resources were being deployed to counter market speculation. Diplomatic contacts were being activated to address the African crisis, and cyber defense systems were beginning active measures against the planned infrastructure attack. But this time, there was a new element that hadn't been present during previous operations I had witnessed. William was receiving real-time updates from intelligence sources, financial markets, and diplomatic contacts simultaneously, processing vast amounts of information and making rapid adjustments to operational strategies as circumstances evolved. The African situation is more complex than our initial intelligence suggested, one of Dame Elizabeth's assistants reported. Both sides have been receiving military support from external sources. The conflict isn't just territorial, it's being manipulated by outside interests seeking to destabilize the region. William studied the incoming intelligence, his expression growing more serious as the implications became clear. Which outside interests? Chinese commercial enterprises seeking to secure mining rights, Russian military contractors looking to establish regional influence, and what appears to be a private military company with connections to European financial interests. The revelation transformed the situation from a local territorial dispute into a proxy conflict between major global powers, with 2 Commonwealth nations serving as the battlefield. Traditional diplomatic intervention would be insufficient to address the underlying power struggle driving the crisis. What resources do we have in the region? William asked. Dame Elizabeth pulled up a different display showing royal strategic assets in Africa. Direct diplomatic relationships with both governments, financial partnerships with key business leaders, and security contractors who have worked with the Crown for several decades. Personnel who have served British interests in various capacities and can operate without official government oversight or constraints. I felt a chill as I realized what Dame Elizabeth was describing. Not just financial and diplomatic capabilities, but actual military resources that could be deployed independently of government authorization. These contractors, William said carefully, what are their capabilities? Approximately 200 personnel with experience in special operations, intelligence gathering, and security consulting. They're currently positioned in 12 African nations and can be deployed rapidly to support British interests. William was quiet for several minutes, clearly grappling with the implications of authorizing military intervention, even if conducted through private contractors rather than official military forces. I'll ask him. We've identified the attack vectors and can neutralize them, but doing so will require actions that might be detected by government cybersecurity agencies. There's a risk that our intervention could be discovered and misinterpreted. What kind of actions? William asked. Counterattacks against the servers being used to launch the assault? Insertion of monitoring software into hostile networks to track future activities, and disruption of financial accounts being used to fund the operation. What was being described was essentially cyber warfare, conducted with royal authorization but without government knowledge or oversight. The legal and constitutional implications were staggering. Sir, Dame Elizabeth said, these decisions represent the full scope of authority that comes with the ring. Financial intervention, diplomatic mediation, and when necessary, direct action to protect Commonwealth interests. This is what your great-grandmother faced during the Cold War, what your father has handled during recent crises. If I authorize these operations, how many people will know what really happened? Government officials may suspect royal involvement in the diplomatic aspects, but the financial and cyber operations will appear to be normal market activity and routine cybersecurity responses. And the contractors in Africa? They will receive instructions through established channels and will execute operations designed to de-escalate the conflict without revealing the source of their authorization. The scope of royal authority that William was being asked to exercise went far beyond anything most people would associate with constitutional monarchy. What Dame Elizabeth was describing was essentially the ability to conduct foreign policy, economic intervention, and military operations, independently of democratic oversight. In your judgment, are these the kinds of actions a modern monarch should be taking? It was a question that went to the heart of everything I had observed over the past 6 months. The young man who had once questioned the ethics of royal intervention was now being asked to authorize operations that blurred the lines between legitimate royal authority and what might be considered unauthorized government action. Sir, I said carefully, I think you're being asked to balance the constitutional role of the monarchy with its traditional responsibilities for protecting the realm. The methods have evolved, but the fundamental obligation remains the same. William nodded thoughtfully. The ring isn't just about authority. It's about accountability. Whatever I authorize tonight, I'll be responsible for the consequences, regardless of whether anyone else knows about my role. The ring represents power, but it also represents the burden of using that power wisely and accepting full responsibility for the results. William stood and walked to the main display showing real-time updates from all 3 developing crises. Authorize the financial interventions, proceed with diplomatic mediation, neutralize the cyber attack, and deploy African assets for de-escalation operations. Full authorization for whatever measures are necessary to protect lives and Commonwealth interests. Financial markets stabilized as royal resources countered speculative attacks. Diplomatic contacts began reaching out to African leaders with offers of mediation and conflict resolution support. Cyber defense systems engaged the planned infrastructure attack with sophisticated countermeasures that neutralized the threat while maintaining operational secrecy. And in Africa, private contractors began positioning themselves to intervene in the developing conflict. For the following hours, I watched William coordinate responses to multiple global crises with a level of authority and capability that most world leaders would envy. The transformation from reluctant heir to decisive global actor was complete, but what impressed me most was his obvious understanding of the weight of responsibility that came with such power. The African situation is stabilizing, Dame Elizabeth reported as dawn broke. Both sides have agreed to preliminary ceasefire negotiations. Our contractors report that external military support has been withdrawn after key financial and political pressure was applied to the supporting parties. The cyber attack has been completely neutralized, another assistant added. We've also gathered intelligence about future planned attacks and have taken preventive measures to protect against them. Stronger this morning than they were before the crisis began. S.B. William sat back in his chair, and for the first time all night, I saw him relax slightly. Casualties? None reported from any of the operations, sir. The operation was managed without direct military engagement. The cyber neutralization was accomplished entirely through technical means, and the financial intervention was conducted through normal market mechanisms. The success was remarkable, but what struck me most was William's immediate concern for potential human costs rather than celebration of operational achievements. The ring seemed to have brought with it not just authority and capability, but a deep sense of responsibility for the welfare of people affected by royal decisions. "Dame Elizabeth," William said, "I want detailed after-action reports on all operations, with particular attention to lessons learned and recommendations for future protocols. And I want to review the ethical frameworks we use for decision-making in these situations." Greece, as the immediate crises were resolved and normal operations resumed. I realized that I had witnessed something unprecedented, not just the successful management of multiple global crises, but the emergence of a new model of royal authority. A man who had once questioned whether accepting the sovereign's ring was compatible with democratic principles, had evolved into a leader capable of using extraordinary power in ways that supported rather than undermined the interests of democratic societies. The ring hadn't changed William's character. It had revealed capabilities that were already present, waiting for circumstances that required their expression. 3 months later, when King Charles returned to full royal duties after successful medical treatment, the transition back to shared authority was seamless. But something fundamental had changed. William had proven himself capable of wielding the full authority of the crown, and both father and son understood that the final transition was now a matter of timing rather than preparation. The last time I saw the sovereign's ring change hands was at a simple ceremony in the same private study. King Charles, fully recovered but visibly aged by his recent health crisis, formally transferred the ring's authority to William in recognition of his proven capability to carry the crown's most profound responsibilities. "The ring is chosen well," King Charles said as William put on the ancient band for the final time. "Your great-grandmother would be proud of how you've grown into the role." William smiled, the first completely relaxed expression I had seen from him since accepting the ring's authority during his father's illness. "I'm beginning to understand what she meant when she said the crown chooses us. The ring doesn't give us power, it reveals power we never knew we had." As I prepared to retire from royal service after more than 2 decades, I reflected on the extraordinary transformation I had been privileged to witness. The sovereign's ring represented more than just royal authority. It symbolized the evolution of monarchy itself, adapting ancient responsibilities to modern realities while maintaining the essential purpose of protecting the realm and serving something greater than personal interest. The young man who had once feared he wasn't ready for the burdens of kingship had become a leader capable of wielding power that most people couldn't imagine, using it wisely and accepting its weight with grace and humility. And the ring had indeed chosen well, and the future of the monarchy was in hands capable of carrying its most profound responsibilities into whatever challenges lay ahead. Years later, when historians try to understand how the British monarchy successfully navigated the complex challenges of the 21st century, they may never know the full truth of what I witnessed in those private chambers and secure conference rooms. But they will see the results: a crown that remained relevant and effective, Commonwealth nations that prospered under royal guidance, and crises that were resolved before they could threaten the stability that millions of people depended upon. The sovereign's ring continues to choose its keepers, and the ancient promise of protection continues to be fulfilled, even when its methods must remain forever hidden from public view. That, perhaps, is the deepest truth of modern monarchy. Not the ceremonies and pageantry that capture public attention, but the quiet, constant work of ensuring that power serves purpose and that those who carry the greatest responsibilities are worthy of the trust placed in them. In the end, I learned that being a witness to history means understanding that the most important events often happen in private rooms, away from cameras and crowds, where character is tested and choices are made that echo through generations. The transfer of the sovereign's ring was one such moment, and I am grateful to have seen how ancient authority can evolve to meet modern needs while maintaining the essential promise that has sustained the monarchy for over 1,000 years.